We're going to work with the segue files we were working on in class, the journal.html. We're going to add some additional CSS here. So you can see that we don't yet have any external CSS file linked. So we're going to create that, and then we're going to link it here. So I'm going to hit Control N on Windows here, that'd be Command N on the Mac. And we're going to start out first by saving our file and saving it as a CSS file so that Brackets knows how to properly format it. So I'm going to hit Control S. And it doesn't really matter what we call it as long as it ends in .css. But it does make sense to call this one journal.css just to match the HTML file, but it doesn't have to be named that. So let's save here. And so make sure you can definitely see your CSS file right there in the same folder as your journal.html. And we're going to make a change throughout the entire page here. So we want to choose the HTML element that affects the entire page, and that's body. So we're going to write body, space, open curly brace, return. And we're going to first change the font family. So font hyphen family, colon space, and we'll just go with one of the preset values here, so sans serif and semicolon. And so we'll save that, and nothing should happen because their page is not yet, or this file is not yet linked to our main page. So we'll go back to journal.html, and after the title here, we will add the link element. So link, space, rel equals style sheet, space, href equals, and we should be able to find our journal.css. So as soon as we complete that line there at the corner bracket, we should see the sans serif font here. Let's go back to our CSS. Okay, so we've done this before. We changed the font family to sans serif, and this is whatever the browser's default sans serif font is. But we can specify other fonts. So if we write this, Arial, comma, space, sans serif, what this means, this is called a font stack. So the browser first looks for Arial, and if Arial is installed, it'll use Arial. If Arial is not installed on the computer, it'll fall back to sans serif. And we can have as many fonts here as we want to. So before Arial, we can write Verdana, comma, Geneva, comma. And so now what's happening is the browser, I'm going to save this, the browser is first looking for Verdana. If it finds that, great. If it doesn't find it, it'll use Geneva. If it doesn't find Geneva, it'll use Arial. And if it doesn't use Arial, doesn't find Arial, it'll default to the browser's, whatever the default sans serif font is for this browser. Next, we are going to change some of the font options for the H1 and H2 elements. Let me go back to my HTML file here. So the H1 is the Segway USA visual title here, and the H2 elements are the dates. So we'll go back. We want to select those both at the same time. So we're going to use a comma, H1 comma, space H2. So now any change we make will affect both of those, and you can see that brackets is highlighting both of them to let us know. And we're going to change the font hyphen weight. And so we've got some numbers here if you wonder what font weight does. What it actually does is make something bold or normal most of the time. And so by default, the browser makes H1s and H2s bold. Instead, we're just going to make it normal font weight. So you can see that they're no longer bold. Okay, so next we want to make a change to the font size for the H1s and the H2s, but we don't want them to be the same size. If we made that change right here, it would affect the H1s and H2s together. We want them to be different sizes, so we have to go back and select the H1 on its own. So H1, and we're going to use font hyphen size. And we could type a number of different units here. So we could use pixels. We could do, say, 24 pixels. Makes it a bit smaller there. Maybe 44 pixels, a bit larger. We could also use what's called M units. So 1.2 M, where 1 M is basically the size of the body text here. But right now I'm going to use percentage. So I'll write 170%. And that doesn't mean 170% of normal. Notice that as soon as we type that, it actually gets smaller. What that actually means is, and I'm going to remember to put the semicolon at the end of the line here, it's 170% of the paragraph size, which is the body text size, the default size, which is usually 16 pixels. So 170% of 16 pixels. Let's go on and change the H2. So H2, we'll change the font size here to 130%. So a bit more, or a bit smaller for both of those than how they started out. Okay, we're also going to look at font style here. We have a block quote here. If we go back to our HTML, this section of the page down here is inside an HTML element called a block quote. So we can select that in our CSS with block quote. And we're going to make it so it's in italics, which is font-style. And we can choose italic there. And so we should see that be in italics. For another look at font size, let's go back up to the body. We can, of course, have multiple property and value pairs here. So we've got font family, ends in a semicolon. We'll hit enter there. So still inside the curly brace, we're going to write font-size. And we can choose a pixel value, an M unit value, or percentage. We can also write small. And you can see that affects the entire page here. And that's whatever the default small value is for Chrome. Something like 12 pixels usually instead of the standard 16 pixels. Okay, let's add two more properties and values here. We're going to change the H1s and H2s again. Let's change the color of those. So after font weight normal, we'll change the color to hashtag CC6600. And again, that means when you see the hashtag there, that means it's a hexadecimal value. So it's that color, of course. The CC is R, or red. The 66 is G, or green. And the 00 is values of B, or blue. And finally here, let's add a border underneath the H1s and H2s. And there's two ways of doing that. Here is one of them. You can do that with text-decoration. And if we do that, we get some choices here. You could choose line through, overline, underline. And underline is the one we want here. And a semicolon at the end of the line. And let me click right between the lines here, or the empty space here, to get brackets to stop highlighting things. And we can see that that underline looks a lot like a link. And we don't want to mislead the viewer of the page into thinking they can click here. So we want to make it look a bit less like a link. So let's choose an alternative way to underline. So instead of text decoration underline, let's get rid of that. We're instead going to use border hyphen bottom. Border bottom. And we can type this in multiple ways. So today we're going to write thin, space, dotted, space, and then hashtag 888888, which is a gray. And again, let me click in between the rules here so brackets will stop highlighting. And we can see that we get a dotted, thin border, and it stretches all the way across the page. Unlike with text decoration underline, it doesn't stop at the end of the word.